everyone, welcome to the 5 Beer Plan. I'm Brian, and this is the ongoing saga of an everyman's ale trail. In this jam-packed episode, I dive into lager yeast, get a quick tip from David at Buckeye Brewcraft, see what the yeast does in the homebrew project, talk about beer with Diana and Jacob from Ten Wasp Brewing, and review a rice lager from Two Toms Brewing in Fort Wayne, Indiana. But before we get this party started, here is this episode's burning question. What is your favorite rice lager? According to Untappd, mine is Makume Gane from Quenched and Tempered in Toledo, Ohio. I enjoyed this one at the 2024 Northwest Ohio Brewbarbecue at Fort Creek Brewery with my beerski Daryl. I noted that it was a gorgeous, light, plum-colored, and clear pour. Light and tart, dries on the finish. In this segment of Yeast Feast, where I delve into one of the critical ingredients to beer and brewing, I say see a lager to ale yeast and look at the superhero origins of a true bottom feeder. You might recall that in Season 3, I talked about the difference between ale yeast and lager yeast. As a quick recap, lager yeast is a bottom fermenting yeast and is a hybrid of two closely related yeast species, Saccharomyces cerevisiae and Saccharomyces bayanus, and thus was born Saccharomyces pastoranius. For the sake of brevity and pride, I'm just going to call it SP for now. So what was it that created this Frankenstein's monster of fermentation? Radioactive wort? Electrostatic charge from the chiller? A hop combination gone wrong? Fortunately, none of these things contributed to the first appearance of SP. I found a really interesting article from beerandbrewing.com recently that provided some clues. Even though this yeast is named after the father of pasteurization, Louis Pasteur, the story of SP goes back about 400 years to a time when Bavarian brewers were fermenting at colder temperatures. At that time in history, there were no pure yeast strains. These brewers were using slurries unknowingly containing Saccharomyces cerevisiae and other organisms that could function at lower temperatures. Fast forward to the mid to late 1800s when science was flourishing. The story goes that J.C. Jacobsen, founder of Carlsberg, visited Munich and collected yeast from the Spaten brewery. To add to the legend, reports indicate he transported it via stagecoach back to Copenhagen. A few decades later, Emil Christian Hansen, a scientist at Carlsberg Research Laboratory, isolated a pure strain of lager yeast from that culture. He originally designated it Unterhefe No. 1, now known as SP. Surprisingly, lager yeast are not found in nature. They are only found in breweries, the result of these two different types of yeast mating. Even Reinheitsgebot, the German purity law of 1516 that called for only barley, hops, and water be used in beer, couldn't stop the growth of SP. The article concludes with the following paragraph. Lager yeast aren't the pinnacle of fermentation or anything of the sort. However, they do represent a fascinating side branch in the realm of human-run fermentations. And in a way, they did take over the planet, because they now produce what are far and away by volume the planet's most popular and widely consumed beers. In this segment of Homebrew Hijinks, where I document my homebrew adventures, I pitch the yeast and ferment the Holiday Cream Ale. Once the boil was complete, it was time to cool the wort. I covered the pasta pot with my sanitized lid and placed it in the ice water bath in the sink. Every few minutes, I would check the wort temperature with my instant read thermometer to make sure I did not overshoot my 70-degree Fahrenheit target. Since I had a pitcher of PBW ready for post-brew cleanup and fermenter preparations, I cleaned the probe to ensure I would not infect the beer in any way. After about 15 minutes, I added more ice to the bath to continue the cooling. I used to think that it had to be done as quickly as possible, but as I've been brewing for a few years now, I found this is not really as mission critical as I thought. Once my temperature was achieved, I pulled off 2/3 a cup of the chilled wort to measure my original gravity, which was 1054. A few points lower than expected, but since I would eventually be conditioning this on some fruit, my thought was it might compensate for a point or two. I carefully poured the chilled wort in the fermenter and used my sanitized stainless steel spoon to aerate the wort by stirring it for a couple of minutes. I dropped my wrap pill in the fermenter and then pitched my packet of yeast, Cellar Science Cali. I screwed on the lid and installed the airlock. Since I typically leave my fermenter on the kitchen counter, I wrapped it in an old towel and used a binder clip to keep it in place. This would insulate the fermenter slightly, but more importantly, keep the light from hitting it. I then began the process of cleaning my brew equipment. It is not difficult. I have my PBW that helps a lot with most of my equipment. Probably the most difficult part these days is the slight residue that appears on the bottom of the brew kettle, likely a little bit of the wort that accumulates as the kettle heats up and then caramelizes. I usually will soak it for a while to break it down and then scrub it a bit with some steel wool to remove it before finally cleaning it with some proper dishwashing detergent. I checked the fermenter the next day and the yeast began its work. It was active for about 4.5 days before the yeast retired. I waited one additional day before preparing for the next phase. Next episode, I move the beer to secondary. Homebrewing can be overwhelming, especially if you are just starting out. Every month, I set aside a few minutes to talk to my go-to expert, David Young, owner of Buckeye Brewcraft in Columbus, Ohio, and ask him some common questions that homebrewers have. In my homebrewing experience, it's happened more than once that fermentation seems to stall out. What does one do when you have a stuck fermentation?
It happens in points of the year here in central Ohio, where you are as well. Temperature, it really should have nothing to do with temperature, but somehow when the temperature is in between winter and spring, and then again in fall into winter, we tend to see it. Again, like HVAC in your home should completely take away any of these issues, but we do tend to see it. There are essentially three I might revise this like I so often do, but there are three major things to consider with stuck fermentation. One, and what's probably the one that comes to everybody's mind first, is overall yeast health. Did you give enough time to let your yeast be able to build a good, strong, thriving carnivorous culture to keep themselves going? And in doing that, did you give them a nutrient base that they need, whether it's from the wort of the beer itself or the must of the wine or whatever you're making? Do the yeast have a happy place to live from a nutrient standpoint? And then thirdly is temperature. Thirdly, did I even give a second one?
I don't think so.
So, so let's take a step back. Let's talk about yeast health. Yeast health being the most critical part. As with anything you buy from a homebrew shop or online supplier, whatever your needs are, where you get them, hopefully you're getting good quality ingredients. We, every week go through our walk-in cooler to make sure that yeast dates are within this correct spec range. And then as a homebrew store owner and a avid brewer, we get to have fun with the stuff that goes out of date spec and brew it into some weird stuff. So that's a whole different topic for another day, but it's fun to see what you can do. Anyway, make sure your yeast is healthy, that you're getting it from a reputable place and it's good yeast. If it's questionable yeast, you always have the opportunity to make a starter. Number two is going to be time. I'm saving the least exciting one for the middle because, let's start strong and end strong here. But time often is the thing that most people don't consider. We live in a very fast-paced world of instant gratification.
True.
And sometimes yeast aren't those people. Sometimes they just take a little longer to get going. Lager yeast and some British yeast personally are what I have the biggest challenge with that on. And I'll tell you, like straight out point blank, I'm an impatient brewer. I usually schedule brew days on a weekly basis, and that means I want stuff to be done and move on and whatever from there. So having a 48-hour delay on yeast showing activity sometimes will just make me think, oh, crap. We'll just pitch the whole thing, start over. So giving it the proper time to let it bloom, develop, and do its thing. Much like I talked about with yeast health, having a starter can help here. This is also a situation that can kind of tag team from our last conversation, Brian, about yeast pitch size, where doubling up your yeast pitch size based off the type of beer may be a good thing. Lagers being the most key example of this. Again, high gravity beers as well. Thirdly is going to be temperature. And this is the big one that can make or break your fermentation. Now, on the basis of this topic specifically on stuck fermentations, I'm going to give some tips that I have found on moving through that. However, don't necessarily think that what I'm saying is going to apply for every fermentation. We're talking specifically stuck fermentations here. So let's say that you're brewing an imperial stout and you want to use some London fog-ish British yeast on it. You throw the correct dose in there. You even created a starter with it because you were concerned everything's nice and clean and healthy. It just doesn't seem to be doing anything. Or what happens more commonly is you'll drop about 15 points in gravity and you'll have another 25 points of gravity to go, hence stuck fermentation. There are three really big tools that we use for managing that. All of them are going to provide some sort of insulation to your fermenter and generally a heat source. Or as a thing called a firm wrap, that's what we use most commonly. It's essentially the guts of an electric blanket. In fact, I have an electric blanket, a king size electric blanket at home that I bought from, I don't know, some online retailer many moons ago that I specifically use to cover my big fermenters because an electric blanket can be great. The downfall with those, just so that the audience can know, is that most of them have timers, and the timer's really annoying. So if you can find one that's just the plug and go and connect it to something like an Inkbird, where you can let the Inkbird control the on off of the heating element, then great. Firm wrap specifically, that is like I said, it's kind of the guts. It's a sheet of a heating element that you can wrap around a fermenter, tape to it, attach however you want. They're pretty safe, 110 volt power source. Ideally, you would connect it to something like an Inkbird to control the temperature, but you could also monitor manually as well. Here, I would also recommend taking a jacket with an asterisk here, and we'll get back to that. Take a jacket, a big winter jacket or something, beach towels that you can wrap around it as well to make sure that you're insulating the heat that's going in and it not just going away to its path of least resistance. That is by far 100% over the most successful way to regain some activity on a stuck fermentation. Other forms of this would be taking your fermenter and putting it into a warm water bath. Measure the water to be something like 80 degrees, put your fermenter in it, let it kick off, and then remove it from that. Because the other thing to remember is that once yeast go, they generate their own internal heat. The
Right.
warmth is a byproduct of what they're doing, so they'll keep moving based off what they're creating. And then lastly, would be just wrapping it in some sort of insulating material, like a big jacket or a blanket or whatever. Now, I told you there was an asterisk on it that I wanted to come back to. Do not use your brand new North Face fleece jacket or whatever super expensive piece of winter gear to cover up your fermenter, because that sucker will get too warm. It will blow through that airlock and you will have a ruined piece of clothing. Don't do it.
If you have a question that you'd like answered, reach out to me at 5beerplan@frontier.com and put Ask the Expert in the subject line. Also, if you are ever in need of homebrew supplies with great customer service, expert answers, and high-quality supplies, please check out Buckeye Brewcraft. You can find them on the web at buckeyebrewcraft.com and tell them that you heard about them on the podcast. Now, it's time for Barstool Banter. In this episode, I continue the conversation with Diana Nidecker and Jacob Hamilton from Ten Wasp Brewery in Sumner, Iowa. Our conversation turns to beer and hops, the benefits of being a nano brewery, and their conviction on using natural ingredients. Let's get back to that whole topic of beer because, as I mentioned, you sent me some beer, and we just were talking about this fresh hop, and I've been sipping on this thing, and I wish people could see this because it is a beautiful, beautiful beer. It's got a nice creamy head on it. It's just a nice light straw-colored pour. So let's talk about the whole idea. You said you got some fresh hops. Tell me about the beer a little bit.
Yeah, so we kind of we were going back and forth. So being a collaboration, and I think my mind for fresh hop beers always goes to West Coast because I think sometimes the maybe greenness of those lends better to that. But they kind of said, let's do a hazy. And you know what? I think sometimes these collabs are good outlets to do things maybe you wouldn't normally do. So I said, let's go ahead and do it. I knew that we wanted super light color. The malts is just, oats and from wheat and Pilsner malt. Very short boil. It does feature Citra in the boil just a little bit. And then their fresh hops were in the whirlpool. And then we hit it with a dry hop of Citra too, because there wasn't a ton of aromatics after fermentation.
Mm-hmm.
Those
Yeah.
fresh hops. It definitely had some of that greenness, but I think just amping it up a little bit and kind of helping everybody out. So we used some traditional, Citra pellets as well.
Yeah.
But it was a fun beer. Nice ABV too. I think 6.2 is what
Mhm.
it came out to be. Sometimes those hazies can get high, upwards of 8 to 9, but
No, I really like it. Earlier this year, there's another local craft brewery. They did a wet hop black IPA, which I was like,
oh, nice.
what? It's
Yeah.
same kind of idea, little twist on what, like you said, Jacob, West Coast tend to be that way just because it really leans into that whole dankness but I
Right.
love the fact you're doing a hazy, but I like the fact that you've got that citrus. Citrus is one of those great hops that just really draw out, the aroma and the flavors of the other hops that you use in there. So I really like the fact
Right.
that you just hit it with just a little bit of Citra to give it that nice nose, because
Yeah.
that's the first thing I'm like, I want this. I want to drink this now
Yeah.
because it smells so great,
Yeah,
It
right.
doesn't
Yeah.
it doesn't fill the room, but you get your nose in there, it's like, oh, this is so wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those hops that almost just, I feel like without Citra, there might not be hazy IPAs too.
For sure. My first hop love was Mosaic, if I'm honest.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the first ones I had that was a hazy was from Anchorage, and it was a Mosaic. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm hooked. I'm hooked on Mosaic. But,
Yeah.
there's so many other really nice ones nowadays. Juicy, flavorful hops that make it more appealing, I think, for the general person, because I remember the first time I ever had an IPA, it was not good.
Right.
Because it was an
Yeah.
American, right? And at that point, I've been drinking,
Yeah.
like Beck's Dark. So I'm thinking I'm cool as a college kid, like drinking this, imported beer. And it's like, yeah, I'll have one of those IPAs. And it was like, ugh, I don't think so. So it took me a number of years to finally lean back into that. But anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I remember drinking, I think one of the first IPAs I had back in college or something was Bell's Two Hearted. And I was like, oh, this is so intense. And now it's going back to that. I mean, it's a classic and I like that beer. But at that time, the first time you have that flavor, it's like, what is this thing?
Even like, Sierra Nevada's Pale Ale.
Yeah. Yep.
If you're like, well, you got to drink this. This is the best thing ever. If you're having that for the first time, it's like, that's just maybe a little bit too much for me.
Right. Yeah.
Now, the other thing I like about this too, Jacob, you mentioned the flaked oats. I mean, the oats just give it such a nice, soft-bodied mouthfeel too. It's just really,
Yeah.
I mean, again, it just makes you want to go back for more. That's what I love
Right.
about beer like
Yeah.
this. So well executed, my friend.
Thank you.
This week, actually, we had a kid come in. It was his 21st birthday. And so he was like, I want something. And so he was looking at the menu. And I was like, what do you like? What flavors? And he was like, just give me. And he was looking at the board and he had said the Danks for the Memories, which is a hazy with pineapple express terpenes. And I was like, do you like hazy? He was like, and I was like, I don't know if this is like the first beer for when you're 21. I was like, it might be a little bit of a punch for you. And so we settled on a lemon shandy, which he really, really liked. I gave him a sample of the Danks and he was like, I see what you mean. It's like, yeah, like you got to grow into it a little bit. Yeah.
Now, when I was there, that Sunday I was all over the place. And so I only could have one beer, and it was the Norwegian Appeal that I had. Really, really good beer. I brewed with Kveik yeast not too long ago, and I was like, man, that thing just chews through the wort.
Yeah.
Fast mover.
Yeah.
Yep.
That beer honestly was made out of necessity. It was our town celebration in last July. And I think our tap list wasn't super huge. And it's Voss that we use in that one. And I've used that before. And I just was like, well, we can make this. And I do think some of the orange citrus notes that it puts off in the esters kind of complement that style of beer. And, IPAs too is fine. But, we have a light cream ale. I figured a big orange, there's a big brand of beer that puts oranges in beer too. So I was like, well, people will love that here. So we put that together and I think we got it done within a week.
3 days. Yeah.
Yeah. From, start fermenting to in the keg. So,
Yep.
and then it just went over so well that
Yeah.
seems like if we get rid of it, people get angry here. The locals get angry. So
People will boo you if it runs out and you take the board down. People will boo you.
Yeah.
It's kind of a flagship. And I think in the beginning, Jacob was like, it's not really, my favorite thing to brew. And I think we ran out of the entire batch in like a week and a half. And we were like, oh, shoot, this is a thing that people want. So now it's on the board as a permanent sign.
It's not always about what I want. So
that's true.
And that's a hard thing, right? Because you do have like you said, you're a big IPA guy. And so it's really hard not to like just lean into having 5 or 6 IPAs on the menu.
Right.
But at the same time, you've got that wide range of people, the spectrum that you've got to, appeal to, so to speak. How many beers do you usually keep on tap at any given time?
We have, what do we have? We have 16 taps, and I think we try and keep 18.
Yeah.
18 taps, and we try and keep probably 10 to 12 of those of beer. And then the rest are there's some couple sodas and maybe a hard seltzer here and there.
Ciders. Waverly, there's a cidery called Paha. And so Mark is the guy that runs that. And so we always carry a couple of his ciders and 3 sodas that we make in house, 2 root beers and a cherry soda. And then everything else is beer.
Mm-hmm.
Do you carry any guest taps or is it all your beer?
We have before. Sometimes, if we need to fill a tap here and there, or if we do like a collab somewhere else and we want to have one of those on tap at our place too.
99% of the time though, it's our stuff now.
Right.
I mean, when we first opened, there was a joke that our first couple weeks, our first month was very, very successful. And we were on a 1-barrel brew house. And so people that came in maybe 4 or 5 weeks after we opened, there were like 3 beers on tap. And so people would be like, I am bummed. And so we reached out to James and Jade, who run Bremer in Waverly. And we were like, hey, you want to help us out? And so I think at one point they had 3 or 4 of their beers, more of their beers on tap than ours. And so people would come in and they'd be like, oh, is this a second Bremer location? No, we're very behind. Yep. I mean, also another plus, right, of the small brewing community is that, I don't know, people have been cool to us, and it's been really fun to work together, even if we're not doing collabs, but just, hanging out, spending time together, bouncing ideas off of each other. Like, that's very cool.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you started out with a 1-barrel brew house. How big of a brew house do you have currently, Jacob?
We have a 2-barrel brew house. Yeah. Got that installed maybe July of this year. So it's been a big help.
Still very small.
Yeah.
I mean, probably about the smallest system in the state for the most part for any brewery. I mean, there are a number of reasons, but I think, current state of the brewing industry, right? Like this is a tricky business to be in right now. And I think it's much easier to very slowly scale up than it is to start really big and then kind of panic scale down or, dump beer or be deeply in debt. And so I think for us, that really like slow and steady growth, like really figuring out what do people like, and having such a small system, we're able to have like a very almost immediate pulse on like what people want, right? Because we go through so much beer so quickly. And so I think there's really not a moment where we have to, you never have to get rid of 100 barrels of beer before you start something else. And so we can kind of do some weirder beers or things that are maybe not as common because, they're pretty small batches. So
I think being able to be small one-offs type of thing too. It's about the perfect size for us in our community. We do have some kegs other places sometimes. If we want to get bigger, I can definitely see that being a hindrance, but I think right now it's a good size for us. We talk about that too, like some of the breweries that we look up to who have been around for 15, 20 years now, all of them start small, right? I think there's a lot of breweries who get too big too fast as well. And maybe that's where they, get in debt a little too much and just trying to take it slow. And
things are very intentional, right? Like the beer that we brew, the colors on the walls, the art on the wall, like the people that we hire, like all of those choices are very, very intentional. And so I think I would much rather have somebody come in and we're out of a couple things than somebody comes back 5 weeks later and it's the same exact beers. Nothing has changed, like there's nothing new. There's no big leaps or I don't know, small and steady.
You're classified as a nano brewery, right? If I remember right. So the fact you've got such a small brew house means you also have the agility to change and shift as you need to, and you stay a lot fresher. So, I mean, you may be burning through beer, but next time I come in there, the Norwegian Appeal is going to be probably pretty darn fresh because you're going to have had to have brewed it probably within the week or two before that, which is nice.
Yep.
Agility is a great word for that. I mean, then we do have that ability to, do some kind of newer stuff. Or I don't know, we did this summer, we went down to Oxford, Iowa, so about an hour and a half south of here. We went to a lavender farm, the two of us, Calyx Creek, and we handpicked half a pound of culinary lavender, and then we came back and we hand squeezed 160 pounds of lemons, and so made a lavender lemonade hard seltzer. Is it a lot of work? Absolutely. Is it like, are there
Is
easier
it
ways?
feasible to do it on a big scale? Probably not.
You
But
can do like even like a 15, 20 barrel batch of something like that. Like, it would be much more difficult to do it so organically with lavender that you handpicked and hand steeped into like a simple syrup. And some of those things like sound like such silly things to do, but I think that quality for us, the quality for the community, like that stuff matters, right? And so then I
Yeah.
think people appreciate what that is a little bit more. Like our
Yeah.
shandy too is 160 pounds of lemons. It's a 3.5 hour project. We hand squeeze
Yeah.
them, and
we looked for maybe shortcuts or easier things too, but like extracts or just some kind of concentrates. But it just,
not the same.
we keep going back to that. We just talked about it this morning. Like we've had beers or sours that feature other fruits, and whether it's price or whether it's just ease of adding things, from other breweries, like generally you can tell if it's probably an extract or whatever it is. I'm wholly on you have to use what you say is actually in there.
Yeah.
We just had a sour on that was called O-Tarts, and it featured breakfast pastries pureed up in
2 cases.
yeah. So
Yep.
I don't know. People are like, "Oh, this tastes like that." I'm like, "Yeah, it should."
150 pounds of like fresh fruit puree, and then 2 cases of frosted breakfast pastry. And so like that sounds a little ridiculous when you like explain it to customers, but then they're like, dang, like instead of just buying 3 drops of an extract, like we actually hand broke all of those pastries, like broke them up, added warm water, took an emulsion blender and like made a puree. And that quality matters for people, right? For some people maybe not, but I think for us, our name is on the door, that stuff matters to us.
Sure. And you can tell the difference. I had a vanilla stout someplace or something like that, probably within the last couple of weeks. And I took a drink and I was like, something tastes weird here. I took another drink and I'm like, damn, this is like drinking straight vanilla extract. I mean, I just was like, I can't do any more just because of that artificial flavor. It's like, that's not what I was expecting. I was expecting something a little bit more, like you said, organic, something a little bit more natural that would lean into that as opposed to like just being right in your face. And I tend to be a purist that way as well. So I appreciate the fact that you're also trying to stay true to your own convictions. And yeah, it's a little more expensive. It's a little bit more time that you have to spend, but people can tell the difference.
Yeah.
Yep.
We've tried. If there was some easy extract that tasted exactly like it and ease of use.
Yep.
Every few months I get it something else and I'm like, hey, let's try this. And we just dose a little beer and it's like, nope.
Same.
Last call.
It's nearly time to wrap things up, but first, one more for the road. This episode I'm drinking Jasmine Rice Lager from one of my faves, Two Toms Brewing out of Fort Wayne, Indiana. From the brewer, light, crisp lager brewed with Thai jasmine rice. Sounds amazing. Without further delay, this is a 5.4% ABV rice lager. So I poured this out into a pint glass from one of my Florida favorites, Motorworks Brewing, down in Bradenton, Florida. This beer poured a very clean straw color. It has a nice fluffy white head. A lot of bubbles at the beginning that have basically kind of ceased at this point. When I poured it into the glass, I was getting a lot of the rice aroma there. So for those that are maybe not as familiar with some of the mass-produced beer that is out there, a lot of the mass-produced lagers use rice. And I think probably because it's a little more inexpensive and perhaps easy to acquire. I really don't know. So if I didn't know any better, I would think that this was just another one of those mass-produced beers, but I do. So, first sip impression. Okay. It confirms my suspicion that it does have that nice kind of lager flavor. It is very light-bodied, so it has that nice grainy kind of flavor to it. There's just something slightly different about it compared to some of the mass-produced lagers that I've had. Again, I'm sure it's probably because they use the Thai jasmine rice. For what it's worth, growing up, we had a neighbor who was from Japan, and up to that point, really, my family never really had any kind of Japanese food, so to speak. And our neighbor really turned us on to rice, specifically like sticky rice. So even to this day, we have rice periodically. Kokohu Rose, that's one of my favorite rices. It's a sticky rice. Just so delicious. As I've learned over time, my palate has matured. I enjoy all kinds of ethnic food. One of the things I like to do is have Thai food. And so, Thai rice, there's just nothing better than having that Thai rice. It's quite nice. I would say maybe that jasmine rice gives it maybe a little bit of a slightly different sweetness to it. I can't really put my finger on it, but it's not like just straight up rice like I would expect from a mass-produced lager. It's smooth. It's really light-bodied. Really, what you see is what you get with this beer. But I will say again, I really like the fact that it's a nice lager that pays homage to those big beers of the past. Of course, it's handcrafted because I know exactly where it came from. So I give this one 3.5 tasters out of 5 on the flight board. Cheers, Two Toms Brewing. As a reminder, I'm always looking for new craft beverages to review. So if you've got one from your favorite local craft brewery, meadery, or cidery you'd like me to drink and describe, reach out and let me know. That's all for this episode of the 5 Beer Plan. With so many podcasts out there, thanks for choosing to listen to mine. Join me next time for a unique secondary fermentation in the Homebrew Project, the final segment of my chat with the Ten Wasp Brewing ownership, and another beer review. Remember to hit the subscribe button on your preferred podcast platform to be notified of new episodes. Follow me on Instagram as well, 5 Beer Plan 2022, to see what is happening on my personal ale trail. I'd love to hear from you, and there are several ways you may do so. Leave a comment for this episode on Spotify, direct message me on Instagram, or email me directly, 5beerplan@frontier.com. Be sure to support your local breweries, choose your beers wisely, and drink them responsibly. Until next time, keep walking your ale trail, and stay thirsty, my friends.